Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. This is a reread. I read the third edition of this book probably back in like 2007 or 2008. This is an updated version for the 25th anniversary. I will go over who Christopher Vogler is, talk about what the book is about, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Christopher Vogler is probably best known for this book as well as being a script consultant in Hollywood, primarily best known for his work with Disney in the 90s. He wrote a 7-page memo that was talking about tying storytelling to the Campbellian monomyth that was passed around in Hollywood in various circles. He read scripts and made notes on scripts as far as the efficacy of the script and how it did or did not work as a story based on his understanding of mythology, specifically his understanding of the hero the hero of 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. This book, The Writer's Journey, is really his model, which he calls the writer's journey, and how each one of these steps corresponds to a step in the Campbellian monomyth, the model from A Hero with 1,000 Faces, and how his model, the writer's journey, corresponds to many very popular movies as well as television shows, but mostly movies. The book is basically mostly for screenwriters who are trying to get into the movies or try to write better scripts. And the book is really that each one of those steps given he gives examples for how each one of these steps are used in different genres of movies, different popular films. He ties each one of the steps to The Wizard of Oz, so he shows, because that fits basically perfectly with his model, and he shows how in The Wizard of Oz each one of these steps. I'm going to try not to use the word beats because that is kind of more of, you often see that with Save the Cat, but these are essentially beats. So we're talking about things like the ordinary world, a call to adventure, refusal of the call, meeting with the mentor, etc. So these are kind of these things that you see again and again in different stories that are in Hollywood. So it's really his model, how each one of these steps corresponds to very famous movies, pictures, different genres. He also has a section on archetypes, which is talking about how different dramatic personae, what role the archetype plays in the psychological role of the story as well as the dramatic role of the story. So there's your heroes, your heralds, your shapeshifters, mentors, the shadow, which is essentially the villain character or characters or situation. Also the shapeshifter, which is anybody who would change roles from the beginning of the film to the end of the film. He has a section called Looking Back on the Journey, which is his look at Titanic. It's basically a deep reading using these concepts of the stages of the hero's journey, the writer's journey, as well as archetypes in Titanic, Star Wars, Shape of Water, which is new for this edition. His work on The Lion King, he talks a lot about, as well as Pulp Fiction. Just Pulp Fiction is kind of used as an example of how you can use and twist and play around with this model. It doesn't have to be sequential for it to work. And then finally, there's about 120 pages of Appendices where he talks about, I think he called this section, More Tools of the Storyteller, or something to that effect, where it's just additional tools for mastering storycraft. So things like concepts like polarity, catharsis, the wisdom of the body. He has a section in there called It's All About the Vibes, which is about the chakras and how the emotion in the story can activate chakras and things of that nature. So that's the book. As you can tell, it's a lot of information. It's quite a thick book. For me personally, I had read this before, like I said, probably 2007 or 2008. I really like the archetypes section. I think that actually is really useful if you're someone who starts from a story with the characters in mind first. If you kind of come up with this character and I'd like this character in my story, but I don't know which one of these roles the character fits. I think the archetype section is actually really good. There's some people who will know this instinctively and will be able to say, okay, well, this character sounds heroic, or this character sounds like your villain character, or it could be a mentor character. But I think just having that written down is very useful. And I think that the looking back on the journey section, especially with his work on The Lion King as well as Pulp Fiction. His work on The Lion King, the part is interesting because he talks about how he had made suggestions They were not ultimately taken into account in the animated movie. I haven't seen the live action, so I can't speak to it, but the animated movie, he had made several suggestions specifically about the character Rafiki, and they weren't adapted, they weren't taken into consideration. But it's interesting to think if what he had said had actually worked, would it have made the story better? What would have been the impact on the story? I thought that was pretty interesting. And then Pulp Fiction, he kind of, like I said, takes this concept of archetypes as well as these stages of the journey and applies it to Pulp Fiction, which is kind of known for being kind of a postmodern or cut and paste, and how people would come up to him and say, well, how does this work with your model? It can't possibly work with your model. He basically shows how even something that is so what feels like out of order or cut and paste works perfectly with the model if you view it the right way. And so I thought that was really interesting. The things that I didn't like as much, this was originally written, I believe, in 97 or 98. And he doesn't really update any of the examples in the stages of the journey section. So he'll make references to Unforgiven or Beverly Hills Cop or Ordinary People. Excuse me, there's a movie called Red River, which I guess is a Western that I had not heard of before reading this book. Excuse me. And so if you're unfamiliar with those, he doesn't really make an honest attempt to update the material, because some of those examples were examples he used in the older edition. So I do wish he had taken the extra effort to update the book with newer examples. I think that would be maybe made the book a little bit more readable, or maybe help people out who are maybe coming from a younger generation. The looking back on the journey section, he has quite a long section on Titanic. That's kind of the longest, if you want to call him a mini essay. That's kind of by far the longest of them. And he goes into a long tangent on why he thinks Titanic is successful. Now, whether or not you love Titanic or don't like the Titanic movie, and he talks about some of the criticisms of the movie. He goes on and on about why he thinks it's successful. And I felt that was kind of unnecessary and untied to this book in a lot of ways. And so it went on too long. It could have been cut. I think he also, one of the things I did like about that chapter is he does mention the criticism of Titanic, being one of them being kind of the villain is paper thin, is not a very villainous villain in terms of being competent, and does things that are not really realistic. And I think my taking of what he said, and it's not really explicitly stated, would be, this model that he has is not necessarily prescriptive. You don't have to do these things in order for your story to be successful. And there are successful stories that don't nail all these things right, but these are some things and some principles and some guidelines that may be helpful to you in your journey, your writer's journey, as it were. So that's my part of my takeaway from that as well. Is even though this movie isn't 100% executing on all the cylinders, it still was powerful for him. And the other part of that section that I didn't care for, there's two parts of the section I didn't care for. He kind of has a perfunctory section on Star Wars that's only like a page or two, but just talking about the influence of Star Wars and how that's helped kind of spur on a lot of people to relook at the Campbellian monomyth. I think he could have just cut that out for time, and it would not have hurt the book any. And he talks about The Shape of Water, which is updated for the 25th anniversary. It's kind of his new addition to this kind of short list of him basically analyzing the story and analyzing the script and kind of going back into the archetypes and showing how it does work with the archetypes, or just does something in different ways with the stages of the journey. My problem with that is the story of The Shape of Water is almost, it's a little fish out of water story, like Titanic, in the sense that Leonardo DiCaprio's character is in love with, it's a star-crossed lover story. And so it's not beat for beat the same story, the themes are different, but I wish he had used that example for something that like Black Swan, which he does to his credit. He has a filmography section in the back of the book, so you can start there as far as if you want Christopher Vogler's recommendations for films that you should see. There's about 200 movies there, and Black Swan is one of the ones that he has recommended. And I think that would have been an interesting look at, does this movie that's like psychological horror, how well does that fit the writer's journey? And the other big one would have been the same year, The Social Network, because essentially it's an anti-hero story. Does that still fit the writer's journey? Does it have to be tweaked in order for it to work? So I wish he had maybe pushed the envelope a little bit there of working with that. I mean, he does say that The Shape of Water takes the hero archetype and kind of splits it in half. But most of that chapter just felt like, I really like The Shape of Water, so I'm going to write on The Shape of Water, and it didn't really feel like he was using it to advance any real points. about his model and how it serves things that you don't typically think of when you think of the hero's journey, which I think maps on really well to myths and to fairy tales. And the Shape of Water is essentially a fairy tale. So I didn't really feel like he had any growth in that area in terms of showing me something I didn't already know. And then finally, the parts of it that I didn't like most of the appendices as far as his screenwriting tools. I think he calls them additional tools for mastering the craft. You can kind of skim those. I don't know how essential they were to the book. The section on it's all about the vibes, man, like I said before, is about the chakras, so that may be something that you're interested in if you're someone who, when you feel emotion, you feel it in different parts of your body, and how that can kind of guide your writing. I think that may be interesting for some people. The section on polarity, I think, is maybe just good for the list of how you can have polar opposites and how those can be used in your story. But that's really the writer's journey, and those are my feelings on it. Like I said, I would suggest that it's for someone maybe who's getting into screenwriting or storytelling or novel writing, and wants just kind of some of this stuff written down in one place. And I think that section on archetypes to me would be the most useful section of just how you can think about moving your characters around in that circle that he has a graphic that's a circle. You know, if I had this character as my trickster, what would that mean? If I had this character as my shadow, what would that mean? So I thought that was useful. Stages of the Journey is very similar to The Beat Sheet by Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, if that's something you're familiar with. Again, I don't know. I believe this came out first, but I don't know who influenced who. I think they're both probably working off the Campbellian monomyth. So you're going to have some overlap there if you're familiar with that. It's not a one-for-one, but it's pretty similar in terms of those things. So if you're familiar with that, I don't know how much new information there is. I think the Blake Snyder Save the Cat stuff may be a little bit more up to date with more popular movies that you've seen. So if you are looking for something that's like a beat sheet, and you're maybe put off by the size of this, maybe the archetypes from this and the beat sheet from there may be helpful for you if you're someone who wants to write to a beat sheet, if that you find that helpful. The looking back on the journey section I did enjoy, and I think that is useful for someone, especially the Rafiki. When he talks about the Lion King, that I thought was really insightful, as far as not so much like, why didn't they listen to my suggestions, but it was like in your mind, you're like, well, would that have been a better story? Actually, it probably would have been a better, more fully realized story if they had taken into his account his suggestions, and he kind of lays it out pretty even-handedly why he felt that way and how that would have tied into maybe a deeper meaning. And that's really ultimately, the book does have something of a spiritual bent to where he believes that these stories are important. He has a chapter called What's the Big Deal and Stories Are Alive, where he kind of talks about the importance of stories. That may rub some people the wrong way, but that's kind of his whole thing, is like using these tools and this wisdom that we've had for thousands of years, and how incorporating that into stories today can make them better. That's really his whole thing. If you don't really are not on board with it, I think there are definitely still things that you can take from this, but I think that's kind of the idea and attitude that he wants you to have. I guess overall what I would say is, if you can get a used copy of maybe the 3rd edition, I would actually suggest you take that up if this is something you're interested in doing, because most of the information in this is in that older edition. This is $30 that I got brand new, so I'm sure you can find a used copy for less. I don't know how much you'd miss from it, to be honest with you. Again, unless you're looking for that section about the chakras and the section about Shape of Water, that's new for the book. He also has, at the end of each stage of the writer's journey, a page or two of questions to ask yourself about that stage, in terms of, how does this stage relate to your life? Is there something that you've seen in other movies that are similar to this stage? So your mileage may vary on that. So I would say, if you're someone who's just getting into writing and just wants something of an understanding of different dramatic personae, or wants something of template that's been successful in the past, then you could do worse. I don't know if you need to sit down and read the whole thing at once, but maybe check it out and see if it's helpful for you on your writing journey. So that's The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. Next time I'm going to be reading Rockonomics, which is on the ebook, so unfortunately I don't have a copy to share for you. If you have read this book, I would be interested to see how you felt it compared to something like Save the Cat or any other beat sheet that you do use to write. And until next time, please follow me on Twitter. I'll have that below in the comments. Until next time, bye.